Regardless of how you're playing your music, I'd like to suggest some of these things because it will make your mixes not only sound better, but it will make them feel better. It'll make you happier about your mix, and it'll make people enjoy your mix even more. So ready? Let's get started. Kind of a interesting question, especially now in 2022, because we have live streamed DJ sets, we have pre-recorded DJ sets, whereas 20 years ago, your DJ set was in front of a crowd, and maybe you recorded it, and maybe you had the ability to put it out on a tape or a CD and people listen to it. But more than not, your DJ set was in front of a crowd of people, especially if you were making money or a professional DJ or by any means, you were in front of people. And that was really great because if you're paying attention at all to the crowd, which we'll go over some of the tips of what makes a great DJ set, and that is one of them. But if you're paying attention to the crowd, you're able to sense the vibe. You're able to sense the energy in the room. And how are people responding to your music? Are they enjoying it? Are they having fun? Are they dancing? Are they moving to your music? And that is one very big key that most people maybe are not aware of. So what I'd like to suggest today is we'll go through a few of these ideas that I believe make for great DJ sets. And if you apply this to even maybe if you're doing a DJ mix in Ableton, if you're not even using turntables or CDJs or Serato or any of the different, Roland has awesome DJ mixers and things where you can just plug in your USB stick and pull up your tracks right on there. Regardless of how you're playing your music, I'd like to suggest some of these things because it will make your mixes not only sound better, but it will make them feel better. It'll make you happier about your mix, and it'll make people enjoy your mix even more. So ready? Let's get started. What makes a great DJ set? Tip number 1, know your tracks. Now, it's awesome in this day and age because if you're using, say, Pioneer CDJs, or I'm sure they're on other CD players too, but you can see that waveform coming across on your display. And that tells you, if you know how to read it properly, oh, the beat's going to drop out because the transients that you see coming across the display, are the beat. So the and you can see that in the waveform. But what happens when you're mixing in and out of songs? You need to know when the song ends. Some songs you can't just look at and say, oh, I have 30 seconds, because some songs you only have maybe 8 bars, and then after that it's a bunch of silence or a sample or something weird, and if you're trying to mix the beat in, that just doesn't work. So 1, get to know your tracks really well. Know the beginning, know the end. And here's something too, that if you are not aware of this, and you have to be careful because there are songs where producers, I think, deliberately throw little things in just to make it harder and have fun and screw things up, or maybe they're accidents. But usually music, especially dance music, follows a 8-bar repeating pattern. So with music, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 1 bar. Now, if you do that 8 times, that's usually when it repeats. So you have a melody, you have something playing, and usually at the end of that 8 bars, there's a and then something kicks in or something else comes in, maybe a shaker, extra hi-hat, whatever it is. There's usually a layering. Sometimes every 16 bars. It used to be more like that in the past, but now it's 8 bars. Sometimes I see it even at 4 bars. And that means that you need to know, okay, well, from this point, once I want to start mixing out of a song, how many bars do I have? Not just the seconds. Do I have 8 bars? Do I have 16 bars? 32? Now, back in the day, I would see DJs write 64, 32. I'd see these numbers, and that would tell them like either the beginning or the end of, how long they had to mix out of that record. Because some genres, like house specifically, if you've ever wondered, why do so many of those dance tracks just start off with and then finally and you're like, God, every song starts off the same way. That's because this music started off for DJs. They were mixing this music. Techno, house, all that came from underground DJs playing old disco records, throwing a beat machine, a drum machine over the top of it, throwing a loop, throwing some of these DJ loops. Some of these DJs you look back in the 80s, early 90s, they're just insane. They're juggling back and forth between tracks. I knew a DJ that would had duplicates or even triplicates of every record, and he would play like 4 bars. So maybe you hear the chorus, groove is in the heart or whatever, and it's like groove is in groove. He was just juggling. It's insane what some of these guys can do. Now that was on vinyl, and that makes it even more challenging, but you can still do that. But you really need to know your records, and you really need to be prepared for, how do I want to interact with this piece of music? And more importantly, what this continues to build on is, when you know your tracks, you're able to then be responsive to the crowd. Because what will happen is, if you're looking at the crowd, you're paying attention to, are they enjoying the songs that I'm playing? Are they moving? Are they dancing? Are they shaking? What's going on? Are they happy? Or, what's the vibe in the place? And that leads me to point number 2, the vibe or the energy. And it's like a marriage in a way between the crowd and the songs. Now, you can start off, and what I would typically do when I was playing in the club at the Hard Rock, the doors would be closed, right? They would be building up the line, trying to find out the ratio of men to women, wanting to get as many women in the line first, and so they had their reasons for holding the door back. But once people started coming in, you didn't want to just hear this like, wow, 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 this loud banging music at 10 p.m. or 10:30 p.m. People are finishing their dinner, they're meeting up with friends. It's kind of like when you go into a movie theater. You just parked, you have stuff on your mind, and you sit down, and it takes a little while for you to transition out of your daily secular mindset, whatever you've been dealing with, family, kids, whatever, and then get into that mood of sitting there and being able to put everything aside and focus on this piece of art, which may be very abstract depending on the movie, especially if you're a David Lynch fan. Might be very, abstract, and so it takes a while maybe to get sucked into what's happening. And that's the same way, at least from what I've observed with people and music, is unless it just happens to be their favorite track. I used to play, at the time, there was a popular mix of a Dido song. Can't remember any others that were like hits on the radio, but also club hits at the same time. Dido was one of them. Interestingly enough, there was actually a Coldplay remix but anyway, so if you were playing a track like that and someone came in and they're like, oh my God, I love Dido, they might be the first person out there on the dance floor. But usually, especially if you were someone that took yourself a little too seriously, as I most certainly did when I was younger, I thought the tracks that I had in my crate were they were fire. They were amazing. And you're playing these tracks, and, it takes a while for people to get into that mood, especially with house or techno, whatever. It's a faster paced type of music, usually around 130 to 135 back then was usually the average beats per minute, which brings me to another tip in a minute. But if it was really, really fast, people had a hard time getting into that. So it was better to kind of start off slower with like deeper house tracks that weren't too aggressive and in your face, because some music, even though it's super high energy and great when you're in an atmosphere of friends and you're laughing and dancing and jumping up and down and having a good time, that can be great. But when you're first coming in and you're dealing with, okay, what is this place like and what's going on here, and you're just getting your boundaries, you don't want to be assaulted with just this loud, overwhelming, aggressive music. And so I would try to build it up with tracks that were somewhat subtle. People could order their drinks and kind of get into their booths and positions and whatnot where they were going to be. And then as it started to fill up, you could start raising the energy of the tracks, which goes back to, do you know your tracks? Because you have no idea how many times I've seen this happen, where DJs would come in and they would play a track that was super popular in the club. There was a track by a group called IO. I guess initially their name was Vaio, after the Sony Vaio computer, VAIO. And so rumor has it there was like some lawsuit with the name, so they changed their name to IO, which is IIO. And to my knowledge, they only ever had this one hit called Rapture, but it was huge in the early 2000s. And Deep Dish, especially the Deep Dish remix, there was another remix that Paul Oakenfold would play a lot, but I really loved the Deep Dish one because it was deep, as Deep Dish, as the name kind of implies, but it had this amazing vocal that just, even if you didn't like techno or that minimal beat, the vocal was just so beautiful and seductive that almost everybody that would hear that record would come up to me and say, "What is this? What track is this? Like, I want to know what this is." So, songs like that were great because you could get people into this mood. But then what would happen sometimes is, if you get people really excited and the energy's building, and maybe it's like you're getting a build going, and you're building up and the energy's going, and woo, everybody's waiting, and the lighting man has made it all dark, and suddenly you get all the lights, you get all the fog, and you get this huge buildup. Well, what do you do after that song? Some people, which I can never understand why, would take a track that, if from a scale of 1 to 10, if that energy of that track was like at a 9 or an 8, they would mix in a track like that would go back to like a level of 3. And so it's like super, high energy and woo woo. And then next thing you know, it's like doom 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 doom. And you're just like, okay, this was not what I was expecting. And you just see the dance floor just, people just leave. It just clears the floor. And if you're a DJ that has ever had that happen to you, you know that is one of the worst feelings in the world, because you have a synchronicity with this crowd and with their energy and the way they're vibing and the way they're responding. And you definitely feel at some point, it feels like the whole room is on this journey together, and you're all kind of in this space, I mean, people refer to it, it's like, oh, I got good vibes, bad vibes, it was good. But that thing, there's something real to that, because you can sense it, and you would sense like, ooh, I did not do this right. I should not have played this song next. So you learn from that. So you want to modulate the energy. People can't just deal with high energy tracks for 2 hours straight. It's just, people get exhausted. And so if you play tracks, 3, 4, 5, 6 tracks, whatever, that kind of build up, but then you got to kind of bring people, give them a rest and let their ears adjust, and maybe you play a song that has some vocals and people can sing along, and then maybe you build up to an anthem with an awesome, like, people would play Sandstorm by Darude over and over and over and over and over. And so people would expect to hear that. But it's like, after that, maybe you could play a few more of those tracks. But if you just played it forever, it would exhaust people. So you have to modulate people and take them on a journey. And that's again where knowing your tracks allows you to do that. Oh, does this song become more kind of trancy and hypnotic and spacey, then maybe that's the time to start getting into a few tracks that kind of take people onto this spaced out journey. And then you bring in this more high energy stuff again, and you modulate that throughout your DJ set. So knowing the vibe and reading the vibe of the room is so important. Knowing the vibe of your tracks, knowing the vibe of the room, paying attention to what people are doing will tell you, hey, how am I doing with my DJ set? Are people reacting to this? Are they responding to this? So that's a really important one. Tip number 2, key your tracks. Why is that important? And most people, if you're not musically trained or maybe you don't know a lot about keying or the keys of the scale, the pitch of a track. So like, let's say if you know a piano, the white keys and you have the black keys. Well, usually, let's just say a song is in C. And if you start playing another track that is in a key that clashes with C, so like maybe if you're playing in C, you might play a track that's in G or F. Those tracks usually will work pretty good together, and you can, if you have your tracks keyed, and hey, this group of tracks, it's all kind of in this same energy level, they're all in C, and then these tracks are in F, and these are G, and these are A, and then there's some trickier, ways of mixing in and out of those different keys. But that helps your mix to sound good too, because not only do you need the vibe and you need the people to react, but you also need the songs to sound good as they're mixing together. And so when you find songs that are in the same key and they might have a little sound or an intro that's coming in, and this other track has something that's kind of fading out, and as you mix those together, sometimes you don't even notice where one song stopped and the next one began, and it just continues on this amazing journey. And again, that's where knowing your tracks, knowing when they end, knowing when to lower the bass on one track and start compensating by bringing up the bass on the next track, all of that is a constant. As you're removing one thing, you're bringing another thing in, and it's just this constant layering and unlayering and building that whole thing up. So even if you don't know how to, some people have a good enough ear, they can just listen to a track and say, oh, I know what key that is. I've seen DJs do that. I can't do that. That's amazing. I wish I could. But there is a program which will do it for you, and it's called Mixed in Key. You can basically drop in your whole set. So all your WAV files or MP3s, whatever, you can drop all those into this program, and it will go through and process all these tracks. And there's a couple different ways that you can key the track. They have a harmonic mixing scale that they use, or you can just simply have it C or B, G, G flat, whatever the key is. So you can choose how you want it to be. But that is super helpful, because suddenly you can drop in like 100 tracks or 500 tracks, however big your folder is, and it will key all these tracks. And then it's like, oh, okay, these are all in roughly the same tempo. And then you can start organizing your tracks and saying, oh, this will work great. This will start off here, then I can come in here, and then this gets more built up and more acidy maybe and more energy, and you start finding these great tracks that help you transition between one key to another key. And that program is amazing, Mixed in Key. So I recommend, if you're a DJ and you're taking your mixes seriously, get Mixed in Key. The next tip is regarding your BPMs. What does that mean? BPM. You've probably heard that or seen that. Well, it means beats per minute. Now, it used to be more important when you were mixing on vinyl, because especially the older Technics turntables, they only would go either so much in the positive direction, changing the speed of the turntable, or so much in the negative direction. So if you had a track that was, say, 114 or 13 beats per minute, and you're trying to mix that into a track that's 130 beats per minute or 135, you're going to end up with suddenly Mickey or Minnie Mouse singing on that track, and it's going to sound like this. It's going to sound horrible because they didn't have, those turntables don't have pitch correction on there. So that's why the faster a record gets, it gets faster and faster, and the pitch gets faster, and so, that creates some problems. So knowing the beats of the BPM of your track helps you to get it within range of the other tracks that you're playing. And even though there's pitch correction when you're playing from an MP3 or a wave, whether it's through, again, these digital mixing programs, Serato, or even the CDJs, still seems to me like it would be smarter to try to mix within that tempo. Because if you speed up a track too much, sometimes it just gets weird. Like, sometimes the vibe and the energy of the song is in the fact that that's the tempo that it's at. And, there's a certain groove to it. You speed it up too fast, it can really ruin a track. So know your beats per minute, especially if you're like old school, you love vinyl like me, and you still care about trying to mix things on records, then definitely take note of your BPMs. But it's not a bad idea anyway, especially if you're doing it even in the digital age. The other thing is beat matching. A lot of people will use programs maybe that matches the beats for them, and that's totally fine. Technology helps us to do tons of great things. But I will say that learning how to do that by yourself and learning how to match the beats per minute of one track to the beats per minute of another track just by your ear alone, not looking at anything, just listening. It's very hard to do in the beginning. I remember when I first started mixing, the first time I got 2 turntables and was trying to mix, I couldn't pay attention to both tracks. So you had the one song playing through the speakers in the room, and then you had the next track that you were going to play next, the next track, next, ready, queued up, and you're listening to it. Usually you got your one ear off, you're listening to the track that's playing out here. Usually you got a monitor that's blowing your eardrums out right here, and so you're listening to that, and at the same time you're listening to this other song that's in your headphones, and you're usually mashing it up against your ear trying to listen to the beats, and you're getting it. You're like, man, it's super hard to figure out. But the crazy thing is, and I imagine it's like this, but people playing guitar and singing or any of these things where it takes the coordination is just insane. I remember feeling a shift, or some sort of a shift in my brain, where even today I can still listen to one thing and I can listen to something else, especially music, and keep track and know, like, oh yeah, this song's faster, this song's slower, whatever it is. Like, that hasn't gone away, but I do remember it took several months of regular practicing before my brain started to be able to really listen to this track and listen to this other track and start to understand what is happening and how do why is this one seeming to not stay on track as I'm bringing it in? Why is it getting faster when it seemed like I had it slower? Now, there's other little variables that come in, and again, that some producers chop things up, and there I have seen mistakes with tracks, and it causes problems like that. But in general, most tracks are okay as you're mixing them if you can really learn to identify how to listen. It's a magnificent thing to experience, not only in your brain, but it gives you that extra, sense to your hearing, which allows you to in my opinion, become a better DJ. So all in all, what have we talked about? What makes a great DJ set? Well, again, genre and track selection aside, doesn't matter. You could be playing techno, you could be playing reggae, you could be playing 50s classics for all I care. Doesn't matter. It's even harder when you're playing stuff that wasn't specifically made to be mixed, because maybe you just have a drum fill doom and it goes right into the track. And so a lot of hip hop is like that. And these hip hop guys, they have to know exactly when to wait for a fill or wait for a moment where there's like a break in another song, and then be able to cross over that, and with that crossfader slam it over right perfectly, so that it's like as the build up comes, and then it's like boom, there's the drop on the next track. So that's a whole other technique of mixing tracks, because you're not so much just matching beats and then taking a minute or a minute and a half sometimes to bring in this other track. You have to do it within just a few seconds sometimes. Maybe you have 4 beats, 8 beats, and that's it on a hip-hop track. Sometimes you don't have anything. Sometimes it just starts right off. Especially when 50 Cent in the Club was really popular, man, that is a hard track to mix. And so there'd be these DJ, I mean, they were bootlegs, obviously, but they would take the tracks and they would extend them specifically for DJs so that it was a little bit easier to mix. Because, man, some of those tracks just that would go right into the singing or the rapping or whatever it was. You don't always have this time and all these beats. So there's different techniques and approaches depending on the genre. But that goes back to knowing your tracks, knowing how much time you have to mix in or out of the track, knowing the key of the track, especially if you're playing more melodic songs and you want them, to go together really well. If you mix one song into another song that has the same key, it's amazing how well they can mix together very quickly. And it just overall makes everything sound so much better when they're in the same key. Again, matching your beats per minute, getting them queued up so they're the same speed. That prevents people. You don't want to play a fast song and then just slam over a slow song, because the slower song will always seem even slower after hearing a fast song. It's a weird perception issue that happens to us. Knowing the vibe of the track, and even if you're doing it in isolation, even if you're doing it in your bedroom, you can still get good at this stuff. You can imagine, okay, what is the journey? And then as you listen back to your own mix, you start to feel like, okay, does this carry me into an adventure? Do I get wrapped up in this and, go on this melodic journey? Or do you listen to part of it and then you're like, oh, I don't really like this part. If you catch yourself doing that, that's probably because you weren't totally happy with the transition and the journey of all the songs that you put together. So that's something to pay attention to. The other thing is really being able to read a crowd. Read a crowd, respond to the crowd, and I know this gets into a whole other topic, which we'll talk about, which is when is that considered selling out? If you're a progressive house DJ, techno DJ, are you going to play hip hop if needed? That's up to you. You have to decide that, and it all depends on your career. We look at people like, Tiesto, Avicii, these different people that were playing. Man, so sad about Avicii. You look at these different people that play these amazing sets, and these are not inexperienced people. They understand this. They feel the music. They really understand the emotional value that a track has. And really, there's a psychological element to this, because people that want to dance and have a good time, they want to enjoy the night. And so taking them on a journey by knowing your tracks, knowing when to bring it up and get it all hyped and get them excited, and then maybe bring it back down and just modulate the adventure of the sonic journey that they're on, it's amazing. And so all of that creates a wonderful, amazing, enjoyable evening, no matter what you're doing. If you're just hanging out with friends, if you're a person that partakes in alcoholic beverages or whatever, there's all these things that contribute, sometimes positively, sometimes very negatively, towards people's moods. And you have to deal with that. But overwhelmingly, if the crowd is in a good vibe and they're in sync with you, and you can feel that. I mean, don't know what it is, but you can sense it. You can definitely feel it. So I would say, just like if someone comes up to you with a bad vibe and you get kind of this weird, maybe scared feeling or threatening feeling from someone, maybe they walk up to you in the parking lot, our body picks up on that. Well, now you're in a club and there's like 500 people, maybe 800 people, depending on the size of the club at any given moment. And now you're picking up, especially as a creative person, I have finally figured out that one of the things that makes us really creative is the fact that we're really open to new experience. And because we're open to these new experiences, we have to be extremely sensitive and to pick up on all these different things. And I think that's just a part of being creative. And so you pick up on these vibes, and I'm telling you, when you have a crowd of people in front of you, majority of them at least, let's say 85, 90% of the people are on the same wave, you're riding that wave with them. And it's this great experience. And I've had DJs tell me that it is unlike anything they've ever experienced. And I'm sure it's the same if you're a rock star or performing for a huge audience. That feeling is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And so anytime that we get to make people's lives a little bit better, we get to bring a smile to their face, well, we want people to treat us that way. And so if we approach our DJ mixes from, hey, what makes it great? Well, all these things, but definitely considering your audience, considering how they're reacting to the music you're playing, and even to your own mood. Why are you playing those tracks? Sometimes you're in a bad mood and you're like, I'm going to play all this angry music and just whatever. And, that will very quickly you'll find out that people are not very happy with you, because you start getting a lot of complaints. And when the bartender comes over and tells you, what are you doing? Then you definitely know you need to change something up, because they're not getting their tips and people are not happy. So yeah, that's not a good thing. But hopefully if you do these things, you pay attention, you won't be in that experience. And obviously, if it's like a wedding or something like that, those are some of the hardest gigs to play, because you can't please everybody, and you have people from all these different backgrounds. One person wants jazz, one person wants Grateful Dead, another person wants Chainsmokers, another person wants The Weeknd, another person wants Britney Spears, and then the lady over there wants Celine Dion. So it's like, look, you're not going to get all that stuff mixed together. I'll tell you a funny story. I've mentioned this before, but when I was somehow playing this event for, I have to look up his name, I can't remember his name, from Monty Python, I had been told he liked the Beatles and 60s music in general, 50s and 60s and that type of stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, like all the stuff that was popular, because a lot of people that tend to like that stuff want to hear the classics. Like, it's rare to have someone walk up and be like, do you have the Animals, man? I want to hear Eric Burden, man. Yeah, play that, Oh, yeah, play Hurdy-Gurdy, man. You're like, by Donovan. You're like, well, I like Hurdy-Gurdy, man, but is that really a a track that everybody else wants to hear, yeah, it's interesting. So I came with probably about, I don't know, 40 of what I considered to be like, the popular Beatles tracks, and, had a few of my favorite Beatles albums like Revolver and the White Album and stuff like that. But of course, interestingly enough, he liked one or two of the hits, but he liked all the weird, obscure songs, and so I didn't have any of those with me. Well, he actually got pretty disappointed, which I can understand. It was his event, but I also felt frustrated because the event coordinator was like, "Oh yeah, the Stones and anything of that era, just play that." And so it was like, okay, so I came prepared to play. Like, I didn't think I was just going to play only Beatles music all night long, but apparently that's what he wanted. He just wanted to hear Beatles music all night long. And I'm like, well, these are the tracks I have. And he's like, can I look through them? And I'm like, sure, go ahead, and he's like, no, it's rubbish. Rubbish. Oh, that one's really rubbish. Oh, good God. Oh, that's rubbish. And I'm like thinking, does he actually even like the Beatles? Because, wow, okay. So, yeah, I think he liked Obla Di, Obla Da. That was the one. And I'm like, I had that, but I just, like, I know a lot of people like that song, but it just seems kind of cheesy. I don't know. Like, you don't want to be up there as that DJ, like, taking yourself all seriously, and you're like, obla di, obla da. It's weird. So, yeah, I guess that was my ego getting in the way, and I guess what I should have done is just brought every Beatles album ever, and in that way, then he probably would have said, do you have a B-side? You remember that 45 that came out in 1966? I'm like, no, I don't have the B-side to that track. Sorry. So, disappointments are going to happen. But you will remember the great gigs and the times that you made people super happy. And I think the best thing to take away here is, if you're really passionate about DJing, you should really care about your audience, because that's who you're playing the music for. If you don't want to play it for them, then stay in your bedroom and play for your mom, or your cat, or your dog, or bird, whoever you have or don't have. But if you're playing for an audience, there's going to be those, you're going to have to find some way of negotiating, so to speak, in your music, and find a compromise of where they're happy, you're happy, and it's going in the direction where everybody can have a good night. And really, that's what you're there to do. You're there to facilitate that night.